Shields up, Ironbreakers, and welcome back to Dragon's Dogma 2. Recently, I was invited to go to the Capcom offices in London for some hands-on time with the game, which basically gave me the excuse I needed to finally pay a visit to Eric's, 269, Paradise Central, Sox, and Jono, which is something that I had been eagerly anticipating for quite some time. Few things have provided me more joy in life than to meet up with friends I've made online, and getting to play Dragon's Dogma 2 was just a nicely added bonus. Now, for this particular trip, I paid for all traveling expenses myself due to budget limitations, and it was very much a shotgun adventure. I flew in Thursday late night, hung out with Jono Friday morning, and for those of you that don't know, Jono is the European Monster Hunter community manager. I met up with some of Capcom's team at the office, played some Dragon's Dogma 2 alongside 2-6 and Paradise, and then I braved London's underground during rush hour on a Friday night to meet up with Eric's in central London for dinner. After that, I woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning and flew back to Portugal. As I'm writing this script, I'm still a little tired, but damn, it was a really fun trip. Special thanks to Capcom's team and Eric's Gaming for being super awesome and accommodating while I was there, and also a very special thanks to all of you watching this, because without you, the Ironbreakers, none of this would even be possible, and I really appreciate your continued support. But anyway, yes, I got to play Dragon's Dogma 2 for about 3 hours, which for a game like this is barely enough time to get your bearings, and being the professional content creator that I am, I wasted all of my time doing dumb things like this.
Incline is as like to throw us off balance as 'tis our enemies.
And I'm not even sorry, because the game is simply a ton of fun to play. Now obviously, with only 3 hours of game time and very little sleep, there's likely a few things I've missed. But in this video, it should still give you a pretty good idea of what some of the changes are and what you can expect from Dragon's Dogma 2. You're likely going to see repeated footage throughout my next couple of Dragon's Dogma 2 videos, since we were only allowed to show 20 minutes of captured gameplay. And naturally, I'm going to have a lot more than 20 minutes worth of impressions to talk about, so bear with me. Also, as we weren't allowed to record menus to prevent potential quest spoilers, so while I will discuss certain things like vocation stats and skills, I still won't be able to show them to you. So I'm already aware a lot of people will want to know details about the resolution of frame rates, but to be fair, there's not a whole lot I can actually tell you about the game's capabilities on that end, since the team aren't really ready to discuss that information yet. What I can tell you is the build we were playing was set up to run at 1080p, and it felt like it was running at around 30 FPS on a PlayStation 5. However, it is important to mention this is a very early build of the game, and we didn't really get to change any of the settings, so I assume it was simply set up this way for stability, since it has already been confirmed by the game director, Hideaki Itsuno, that the game will release with an uncapped frame rate. Another thing specifically about this build is that it was prepared for us to experience the gameplay of Magick Archer and Mystic Spearhand. But you can't really expect me to play with a bow. That's simply unreasonable, and quite frankly, I was offended at the prospect. So naturally, the only reasonable thing was for me to change vocations to a fighter, sell all the archer gear, and buy myself a nice shield and mace combo. Now, on a serious note, we were allowed to experience whatever vocation we wanted, with the exception of Warfare, which wasn't really present in the build. However, due to limited time and the required setup for trying different vocations, I focused on experiencing the Magick Archer, Mystic Spearhand, Fighter, and Trickster. So after setting up the Magick Archer character as a fighter, I proceeded to ignore every single quest in my journal and immediately headed outside the city to explore the world and see what it had to offer. So I guess we should start with the visuals. The game looks absolutely gorgeous. It retains the same art style as the original, but with a richer color palette and naturally much better textures. However, one of the most significant improvements has to be the lighting, which really brings the world to life. Moving through the world, I find a few goblins that need to be put in their place and immediately get to work experiencing the new combat, which feels very familiar to the original Dragon's Dogma. There is no hard lock-on, no get-out-of-jail-free dodge roll. It's all about proper positioning, party composition, party recognition, and practice. So naturally, when two big Cyclops showed up to crash my party, I wasn't really scared. I immediately initiated Dwarven negotiations by applying mace to face with reckless abandon. However, when a rogue griffin decided to show up and interrupt my little two Cyclops party, things got a little too chaotic and my pawns all started taking dirt naps on regular intervals, which naturally meant that I had to spend a decent chunk of time rezzing them, which by the way, has received some quality of life changes. Now when you resurrect a pawn close to another pawn that is already dead, both pawns get resurrected, which is really nice. But luckily, the Cyclopses weren't particularly happy about the Griffin joining in on their fun, so they proceeded to bash the daylights out of it, which was an interesting interaction to witness, because while monsters could harm one another in the previous game, I personally don't remember seeing them straight up ganging up on a different monster, which was really cool to see. Now before I start this next segment, I should mention once again I only got to play the game on PlayStation 5, so I'm going to be diving into specific controller inputs and I can't really talk about keyboard and mouse equivalents since I've always played Dragon's Dogma on controller. My apologies for that, but you should still be able to understand some of the changes and innovations they are bringing to the combat system. Regarding specific mechanics, one of the things I noticed while playing the game is that they changed the way weapon skills work. In the original, you would be able to equip 3 primary weapon skills, and you could access them by holding down the left bumper or L1. Then you also had 3 secondary weapon skills, which you accessed by holding down the right bumper or R1. The only exception to this was the warrior, who for some reason was limited only to his primary skills. In a lot of vocations, but not all, these skills would usually be associated with different weapons, so the fighter would have 3 sword skills and 3 shield skills, whereas the Magick Archer would have 3 bow skills and 3 staff skills, and so on. In Dragon's Dogma 2, they are taking a different approach, which we should have seen coming really since no vocation has access to more than one weapon class, with the notable exceptions of the fighter if you consider a shield a weapon, and the warfarer which will naturally be able to wield multiple weapons as part of its vocation mechanic. So in the build we got to play, we were only able to equip 4 weapon skills which were accessible by pressing the left bumper, and the right bumper was instead used as a vocation specific mechanic. So in the case of the fighter, this was the ability to block and parry. For the Magick Archer, it gave you access to the skills Pinpoint Volley and Rivet Shot, which basically allowed you to lock on and fire a bunch of arrows at your enemies. For the Mystic Spearhand, it's a chargeable skill called Redoubted Bolt, which I'll dive into more detail in a future video. And for the Trickster, it was the ability to reposition the Aggro Effigy, which again, I will also detail in a future video dedicated to this vocation. Passive core skills and cross-vocation augments are still very much a thing if you're wondering, but naturally I didn't really get to experiment much with those since with the limited time we were given I wasn't going to be running around leveling up vocations whose gear I couldn't even afford for an additional passive skill. It was enough to learn all of these systems were still in place to allow you to min-max your character to unreasonable levels. And while we're on the topic of min-maxing, something I've been curious about was how stat growth was going to work, since in the original, if you leveled up as a warrior and later changed your vocation to sorcerer, you would still have the stats of a warrior, which naturally weren't the best for your new vocation, and while this could be mitigated with gear, you were still losing out on damage, which eventually would cause people to level up using vocations they didn't actually want to play in order to optimize stat growth for their intended vocation. A good example of this was leveling up as a sorcerer in order to increase your damage as a mystic knight. And I'm actually curious, so if you're one of the players that preferred this leveling method, do sound off in the comments. However, for Dragon's Dogma 2, our testing revealed that they're doing it differently. It seems each vocation has its preset stats and stat growths, so when you swap vocations, your stats are going to adjust accordingly, which means you can safely play whatever vocation you like without permanently changing the stats for your preferred build. And for me, this is a massive quality of life improvement. Now, jumping back to gameplay-specific features, another thing that I noticed when pressing the left bumper to access my skills was that it also gave me quick access to consumables, and it automatically cycled through different consumable items. So L1 plus up D-pad would use whatever item I had in my inventory that could heal me, L1 plus down D-pad would bring up a stamina recovery item, L1 plus right D-pad would use the lantern, and L1 plus left D-pad would bring up the item menu. I don't know if these will end up being customizable in the final build, as I was more focused on capturing gameplay footage, but I definitely liked how seamless it was to heal up and recover stamina. As I experimented with the skills, I also noticed one of the fighter skills, Gouging Skewer, actually placed you into a grabbing position, like when you grab onto a monster and start climbing it and stuff like that, right? So you would execute the skill, and when it landed properly on a big enough enemy, you would be grabbed onto it and you could carry on the actions of a regular enemy grab. I was also able to do this with one of the Mystic Spearhand skills, so this isn't a fighter-exclusive feature. And finally, another mechanic I learned is that there are now critical attacks that you can do as a melee class. These can be performed on both large and small enemies and just consist of approaching an enemy when they're down or toppled and pressing the triangle button, which will result in a much more powerful attack than usual, almost like an execution. And speaking of toppling monsters, there's also now a new grabbing mechanic wherein you can grab onto a large monster's leg and push or pull on it to throw them off balance and topple them. I don't know exactly how this works on four-legged creatures, as I wasn't really able to properly test it since the griffin kept running away from me, but I most definitely toppled a golem like this. So yeah, I learned a lot of new mechanics, but at this point I figured I should stop having so much fun and actually spend some time playing the intended vocations that were set up for this build, so I reloaded the save file and became a Magick Archer. However, as you can imagine, my dwarven demeanor ill suits an archer, so I wasn't particularly adept at it, but some of the Magick Archer skills were actually really fun, like the ricochet arrow, which I can imagine being downright nasty when fired inside a cave or structure, looked really good. Although my favorite had to have been the Flame Fang arrow, which you can fire after charging, and then you can control the trajectory of an explosive arrow, which not only dealt a considerable amount of damage, but it was also very fun to shoot and control. I may have spammed it a little too much. Beyond that, they also added a very interesting mechanic with the Remedy Arrow, which was a skill that allowed you to both heal and resurrect your pawns, which, as you can imagine, is going to be quite useful as a backline vocation. But overall, my 3 hours of hands-on time felt like they absolutely flew by. The world is incredibly enjoyable to navigate and feel just ripe for exploration, but naturally, for the purpose of capturing footage, I was just running all over the place trying to find interesting monsters to fight, and both the combat and traversal felt incredibly smooth and satisfying. The new gameplay and quality of life changes feel very good. The monsters feel great to fight, and for all intents and purposes, it just feels like the natural evolution of the original game. And the Mystic Spearhand vocation, oh man, it was an absolute joy to play. So good, in fact, it's currently my favorite vocation, and it's not even close. However, I will be making a dedicated video for the Mystic Spearhand, as there's a lot to talk about, and if you happen to be curious about the Trickster, don't worry, I plan on making a video covering that one too. And just in case you're thinking it feels like a gimmick class, it's actually quite powerful, and it doesn't feel nearly as awkward to play as you might imagine. You can expect videos on those two vocations to hit the channel soon, and if you have any specific questions, you can leave those in the comment section below. But for now, thank you all very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, as it really helps me out. And while you're down there, feel free to subscribe for more Dragon's Dogma 2 content. Stay strong, stay safe, peace out.